Hey there, in this video I'm going to be showing you how you can make a three-tiered book ledge as shown here. This is for our child's room, and her room gets pretty messy and we just wanted an extra place to store books. So it's a huge space saver, and this is the wall behind her door that we wanted to install it in. It's a pretty underutilized wall and thought it would be a good place for that. So first step, pretty simple. We're going to be locating the studs in the wall. I have my trusty stud finder there, and this is obviously important because you want to, anything you attach to the wall that's going to be bearing weight, you obviously want it to be attached to the stud. So I'm just simply making some measurements to decide kind of where, how long I want the book ledges to be on this wall. And so I'm just going to put a little mark on the wall, and then I can start to look at my cuts of wood. So I just had some scrap metal. I've got some quarter round right here, and this was just lying around my garage. It's pre-primed already, but to be honest, it doesn't really matter. You can use any type of wood that you want. I also have some baseboard, some old baseboard left over from a prior project. You could pick up baseboard though at a store. I like the one with the kind of a beveled edge that looked like this. And so here's the quarter round. I'll explain more of the wood later, but essentially we're going to get that out and just kind of sand it down a little bit, make sure there aren't any like splintered areas and whatnot. I'm not worrying about the holes right there. And I'm going to also take my third piece of wood, which is leftover molding that goes around a door frame. Okay, so these are 8-foot sections. But again, if you don't have these particular setups, just go to the hardware store and find some wood that you like that kind of matches those three pieces. And I'll show you how all three of them kind of fit together like this, but this is what I'm trying to build here, right? That final product. So you got to have a vision first, and then you can start cutting your wood. So the first thing I did was cut down the wood using my miter saw, and I wanted a tiered system so you could see that there was a short, a medium, and a long piece, right? And so I'm just going to use those measurements that I took of the wall and make sure that each piece of wood has the ability to be connected to two studs, right, on the wall. And essentially I'm just taking my three different types of cuts, my quarter round, my baseboard, and my molding, and I'm just making sure that all three of them are the same length. Okay, so pretty simple first step. Just make your cuts based on your measurements that you want. Okay. So once you have all your cuts made, this is how it kind of goes together. The quarter round will sit atop the baseboard piece, and then the molding, the door frame molding, will go and serve as the back. Okay, so this quarter round piece will kind of be the ledge against which the books that you put will stop. And this is an important piece, right? You don't want the books that you put on there to be sliding forward when you prop them up against the wall. So that's kind of how it fits together. Now this is my air compressor, and I have it attached to my brad nail gun. I'll put a link in the description below if you're interested. I highly recommend this tool. It's going to save you a lot of headache and time, and I'll show you how this works and why. But you essentially load up your brad nails into the slot here and close it up. Highly dangerous device, so make sure you don't compress the trigger into something that you don't want it to the nail to go into. But it does have a safety feature on there. Incidentally, the trigger or the top there has to be depressed for a nail to actually come out. So I will fire this thing up and build the pressure up to about 60 to 80 so it has enough force to deliver the nail. Now what are we nailing, you might ask yourself? Well, we're going to be putting this together using brad nails and some glue. This avoids having to use any screws or anything that has a huge head to it that might be unsightly. So the first thing we're going to do is just take some glue and just kind of glue the two pieces together. There you see the baseboard and the crown molding, so the back and the floor, so to speak, of the ledge. And I have some clamps here that will help the glue dry. And this just helps obviously to make a basic connection between, a consistent connection between the two. Your nail will help, of course, with the final integrity, but the glue will just make sure everything is consistently together, right? So I'm going to let that dry a little bit, and while it's drying, if I'm confident that everything's lined up where I want it to be, I'll take my gun here and put a nail in various places. Okay, now you're going to want to make sure your aim is spot on. You don't want it going too downward, and so the nail pokes through the bottom of your ledge there, and you certainly don't want it to go upward. So you got to get it perfectly kind of a 90-degree, so it protrudes through the baseboard bottom as well, if that makes sense. So I'm going to do that with all three pieces first, all three ledges, okay? Attach the back to the floor using my clamps, glue, and my nails. Once you have a couple of nails in, you can, if you, well, I definitely recommend this, use some 2-inch screws. I have 2 or 3 of them that I'm going to use in each piece. And I mentioned that it might have an unsightly head, but this is the back, so it won't be actually seen, okay? And it's going to provide your ledge extra integrity to make sure no matter how heavy the books that you put on there are, it's not going to bend that forward or kind of detach in any way. So what I'm doing here, I'm pre-drilling my holes. That's important. You don't want the wood to split at all. And then I'll take some deck screws, some aggressive heavy-duty deck screws, and I will get that started. But before I drill that screw all the way in, I'm going to take this little piece and I'm just going to drill out a place for the head of the screw to rest. I recommend this step. Again, it provides a seat for the head of the screw so that no splitting occurs or minimal splitting occurs. Okay. So once that's done, I can take my screw there. Again, you're going to want to make sure you're perfectly level. You don't want the screw to protrude from the bottom or come out the top, obviously. It has to sit perfectly. Now, this is what happens if you don't make your that seat for the screw head wide enough, wide enough. You can actually split the wood. Now, if that happens, I recommend just taking some wood glue and just kind of combing it in the cracks there. That's going to prevent any future cracking from happening. And so that was my little mistake, but that is bound to happen. Nevertheless, we are secure, and we have, I think, a very strong base and strong bottom to the ledge. So I'm going to continue doing that using my drill bit, and I'm going to be screwing in the back to the bottom as shown here in all three ledges. Now, after you have your screws in and they're all flush, you don't want them to be protruding because that'll create some distance between the wall and your ledge, right? So make sure they're all flush. Once that's done, you have the base and the back connected. We're going to be taking our quarter round edge now, and we're going to be adhering that to the book ledge. So again, this is the top or the front of it that prevents books from slipping forward and falling off, right? So an important part of the process here. So we're going to, again, adhere a fine layer of glue to the quarter round. And we'll just gently kind of put that on. Make sure your edges are lined up. You don't want any mismatched edges, and you want them to be nice and flush on both ends. Again, I'm not worrying about those holes. That was from a prior project. I'll patch those up later, but this is kind of what I'm looking for. I'm just going to let that dry for several minutes. And I'm going to do that with all three ledges as shown. And just to help ensure contact, I'm going to use some clamps to make sure things dry a little faster and a little better. I highly recommend these clamps, by the way. If you don't have some, definitely pick them up. I'll put a link down below for these particular clamps. It's a set, and I absolutely love them for any woodworking project, basically. All right, so what we're doing here is we're going to take some paintable caulk, and I'll put a link down below for this stuff. You don't want 100% silicone where it can't be painted over. And we're going to basically be filling in all of those seams. You can see there's some gaps there, right, between the base of your book ledge and the backing, and also the quarter round. So this part's pretty simple. If you've not worked with this stuff before, I like to kind of lay it on in globs as shown, and then just take my finger. Um, Feel free to wear gloves if you're not comfortable, but I find like I have more control over it if I use my bare finger. And I'm just going to kind of work it in. Um, Multiple passes are allowable while the stuff is wet. But if you wait too long and you try to make another pass with your finger, it's going to bring up some of that dried stuff and create a real problem for you. So definitely try to work with this when it's wet. And I'm just going to kind of put a bead and the bead doesn't have to be very even. Again, I'm going to work that in with my finger. And I'm just going to smooth that all out. And that's going to help fill in, again, fill in those cracks and those gaps between the wood and give it a real finished, polished look. And I'm going to do that with all three of my ledges here and again on the quarter round, both sides of the quarter round. Basically anywhere you see a gap. And again, don't wait too long. I like to apply the caulking to one ledge at a time, one seam at a time, before I move on to the next. All right, so once that's dry, now the fun part begins. We can create some consistency by painting your unit. Now I'm using chalk paint. I'll put a link below for the stuff that I use. Love the chalk paint. You don't have to prime it. You don't have to prep it, so they claim. And I haven't had any problems with it. Now obviously my particular project, some of my wood was pre-primed and others was had kind of a finished already look to it. It was already a finished wood. And so I didn't have to prime that. As you can see, I just put the chalk paint on directly. And that was really nice, very convenient. Love this stuff. And I also picked up some finish for the chalk paint. This is kind of a sealant that they recommend you put on. It kind of gives it a not too glossy of a look at all. In fact, it kind of has a matte finish to it. But it just provides that extra layer of protection over the paint once everything is painted. So I'm going to paint all three pieces, and then I'm going to put the sealant on all three pieces. And of course, I'll let that all dry. And our next step, we're going to be taking everything upstairs to the site where we're going to be installing. Make sure I have my air compressor, my level, my tape measure, pencil, obviously the ledges that are ready to be installed, and my drill. So we have our bare site here. And hopefully if you did all your measurements and your cuts correctly, as I mentioned before, you're going to have a place in each of the book ledges that you're going to install, two different points to connect to the studs, if that makes sense. So I have my stud finder. I'm using 2.5-inch screws, and that's going to be able to penetrate the drywall and the studs behind and provide some really strong integrity. Now, before I put these up, I'm going to measure how far apart I want them from one another. You can see here I have located the studs, and I'm going to be putting my longest ledge on the bottom, and then I'm going to tier it on the way up. Okay, now I want them about 15 inches apart from one another because that's going to ensure that a really tall book can fit on any of the given shelves. All right, so once I'm confident on my measurements, I know where I want each ledge to be attached. I'm going to fire up my air compressor here. Now this is going to be, again, a huge time saver for you. If you don't have one of these with an air gun, very affordable. It's going to be with you, I think, for a lot of projects that you do around the home. Highly recommended, and here's why. Obviously, you can have somebody help you if you don't have an air gun, but this is a one-handed job, basically, if you do have one. You'll just obviously make sure everything's level, and with one hand, you can make a connection, put the nail anywhere you want, really. That's just going to adhere it to the drywall, and that's fine for the time being. We just need it to stay where it's at so we can put the actual screws in later. You can see I have two nails just put right there, and that just, again, makes sure the ledges stay put and they're in the right place. And again, I could do that with one hand. So once things are where they are, I can take my drill and pre-drill my holes into the studs. So I'm going to make sure that when I drill, or where I drill, there's going to be a stud behind there. This is important, again, for the integrity of the book ledge. All right, and when you are pre-drilled, you should see wood grains on the end of your drill bit there. That knows that you hit that wood stud back there. And now we're going to take our countersink and clear out a little space for the head of the screw to sit nicely. And this is an important step because you don't want any splitting or cracking to occur when you tighten up the screw against the wood there. So with our holes pre-drilled, we're ready to put our screws in. So I have some 2.5-inch deck screws that are pretty aggressive. They will bite very well into that stud behind the wall there. And I'm just going to push those all the way down and then some, because I want some patch to be able to fill over that hole so I don't see that ugly screw head when this is all said and done. So I will go ahead and do that with all of the screws and watch that book ledge tighten up against the wall. You should see the shadow there just disappear. Look at that. So I know it's biting very well snugly into that stud. Now this is a kind of a 45-degree angle here to hit this stud. And of course I knew that going in, but watch how I'm going to basically put that screw all the way in without any splitting, and that will allow me also to patch up that hole nicely. So you can see how important that countersink is and a good pre-drilled hole. All right, so I'm just going to make sure those are all nice and snug and seated behind the surface of the book ledge there so that I have room to put some patch over. So now I have my screws in. I'm just going to take some drywall patch. You can use some paintable caulking as well, whatever might suit your preference. I just have some regular drywall patch, and I'm just going to put a little bit there as shown. I'll give that time to dry, and then I'll kind of rub that down. That should create a nice, even, smooth surface and completely hide those ugly screw heads that we just put in. And with that done, I'm going to obviously paint up those holes that I just made. And if you do have any screw heads remaining, that paint should just cover right over it. And again, you'll have books on this, remember, too, so it doesn't necessarily have to be perfect, right? All right, and you can put some sealant over that as well as we did before, so it gives a nice uniform match. So that's it. We've got our 3-tiered book ledge system installed. Everything's level, painted, and we can go ahead and start putting books up on it, as obviously the intention is. And yeah, pretty simple project. My daughter loves it, and it's, again, a huge space saver. Easy do-it-yourself job. Thank you so much. Hope this video has been helpful.